Hey everybody, it's Courtney and I am back with another video. A lot of you have requested to see a video using colored pencils. So I'm using my Polychromos here and I'm going to be coloring on this tone gray paper by Strathmore. And I'll be using the Sympathy Lilies stamp set by WPlus9. I'm new to colored pencils. I've owned them, but I've never really worked with them too much. So I think this is maybe the third or fourth time that I've used the Polychromos. So I'm by no means an expert, but I'll kind of go over some of the things that have worked for me so far. So I'm using my Misty here and I'm stamping in Barely Beige ink, which will almost give it a no line look. You will see a little bit of it, but it will be very faint. I'm going to stamp it twice just so that it's easier for you guys to see on camera. And just keep in mind that this paper is not cardstock. It is a lot thinner, so you will need to definitely layer this. I am starting off with 5 different colors here, and these range from a dark yellow all the way to a very dark orange. I'm going to be coloring these lilies as if they were tiger lilies. So the darkest areas are on the tips of the petals. I'm starting off with my lightest color and I'm covering the entire petal here, and I'm using a very light hand. I'm really barely touching the paper. Then I'll go in with my darkest color and I'm just adding this to the very tips of the petal. Then go in with all of my midtones, blending right over where I left off, down a little bit further, just leaving a little bit of that yellow towards the base of the petal. Like I said, I'm very new at these colored pencils, but I'm kind of coloring the same way as I do with my Copics, by starting with my light and working my way up and down. Remembering that if you keep a light hand, you can always go back and add more. If you press too hard, there's no adding any additional color after that. Once I had all of my colors down, I went back in with that lightest color and I covered up the entire area. I'll show you another petal here, but I colored all of these flowers the same exact way, and it did take a while, so I won't make you sit through that. And I did take a couple of breaks here and there because I'm not used to coloring with these pencils and my hands were cramping and I was not pressing hard, so I'm not sure what the deal was. But anyway, I am coloring this petal the same way as I did the first. Now, a lot of times you can blend colors with your white pencil, but I also found that you can blend with your lightest color. So when I go back in with my lightest color, I'm not only going over the lightest area, I'm going over the entire petal. Once my entire flower was colored, I went in with this deep red color and I added my stamen back in. Now I'm referring to the packaging here because it's very hard to see once you have all that color down. And I'm adding my stamen and a few little dots on each of the petals. If you ever looked at a picture of lilies, lilies are my favorite flower, so I know what they look like, but they have little dots almost on the petals, and it's actually the pollen or whatever comes off that stamen. But I'm just adding a few little dots to each of the petals just on the inside, just to give that a little bit of texture. Once all of my flowers were colored, I brought in a cool gray pencil and I'm just adding my shadows here. A lot of these flowers lay over top of one another, or some of the petals lay over one another. So I'm just adding with a pretty light hand, and my pencil is very sharp here, just a little bit of a shadow. Because I used so many colors in the flower itself, I had a hard time adding the shadow with those colors, and it's probably because I am so new at this. I'll get used to it just like I did with the Copics, but I found that it was a little bit easier to add my shadows with the gray. Next, I'll go in with a couple of greens for these larger leaves, and these are kind of appear to be curved a little bit. So I want my highlight to be in the center so that it makes it look like this leaf is curved down, I guess. So I'm doing this the same way. I'm going in with my lightest color with a very light hand and covering up the entire leaf. Then I'll go in with my darkest green here, and I'm going to be adding some shading to the tip of the leaf and where that leaf is kind of laying underneath that lily. Next, I'll go in with my mid-tone green and extend that out a little bit further, just as if we were coloring with Copics. And then I'll go back to my lightest green and cover up the entire leaf. I did go back with my darkest color and added that line back in. That was actually part of the stamped image. And again, just make sure that your pencil is very, very sharp whenever you go in and add more detail. For these other leaves, I decided not to color them as leaves. I decided to color them more like stems, I guess. So I'm going in with browns. And because these are such a small little area, I'm going in with my darkest color first. I'm adding the stem and then the little leaves, I guess, that are coming off of that. I'm just putting a little bit of shading right there on the base, right where it meets that stem. And again, I had to take out that packaging for the stamp set just to have something to reference because these were kind of difficult to see. I stamped with a dye ink, and anytime you stamp with a dye ink, it does fade as it dries. So it kind of, as it seeped into the paper, it was a little bit more difficult to see, even though I did stamp it twice. These two browns were a little bit too similar where it didn't look like there was any shading at all. So I decided to get a lighter brown for my highlight. I kept that dark brown out, but I ended up going with a much lighter brown, which actually blended very nicely. Being it is such a small area, you're not really going to notice too much. You don't have to worry too much about your shading here. So again, I'm going in with my darkest color, coloring in that stem and the base of these little petals or leaves. And then next I'll go in with that lighter brown that I had grabbed out of there and blend that out. And I did go back with that one that we already colored. I just made these little leaves a little bit longer just so that I could add in that lightest color. Once all of my coloring was done, I decided to bring out my Misty again for my sentiment, just because I spent way too long on this and I was too afraid I was going to mess up. So I'm putting the prayers on top and the rest of the sentiment there on the bottom. And I'll be using dark chocolate ink by Simon Says Stamp. And I knew more than likely I was going to have to stamp this twice because I am going over that pencil. And I noticed here that it doesn't really look the same in the parts that go over where you colored. It doesn't look the same. I didn't have a problem. It didn't smear. But if you look at it from a certain angle, it kind of looks shiny. But I'm okay with that. I'm not starting over at this point. I have a A2 size card base here, and I believe this is Fog by Simon Says Stamp. It was the one that matched the best to that tone gray paper. I'm using my tape runner to adhere this panel onto a panel just cut slightly smaller, and this is dark chocolate cardstock by Simon. And then I can go in with my liquid glue. That paper is just too thin. I didn't want to take the chance of using that liquid glue. Once my panels were adhered, I took some Nuvo drops and just added those to the top and the bottom corner. And that is it for this card. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.